This is a Space Marine. This is a Space Marine I painted when I was 12. And today we're going to repaint him in a modern 40k style. After a nearly 15-year hiatus, I've decided to come back to Warhammer. I used to love building and painting them when I was younger, and I thought, you know what, I fancy giving them a go now. So this is one of my first ever Space Marines in nearly 20 years? First things first, we need to strip the paint. So in the interest of time, here's what I made earlier.
Nice.
Next, I'm using a modelling knife and a file to get rid of excess mould lines and sprue nibs that 10-year-old me clearly didn't have the patience to do. Next up is priming. I'm using Citadel's black primer base here, spraying from about 15 to 20 centimeters away from the mini for good coverage. Realistically, I should have given it more time to mix in a warm bucket of water, as it sprayed out a little bit mottled. Hindsight's a wonderful thing, but it laid down well enough that it's certainly usable. Now for our base layer, I'm going to be using Nagaroth Night for this. Why am I using purple instead of blue? Well, shadows aren't actually black. They're a darker shade of whatever colour the light is projecting onto. So purple makes sense to use when painting ultramarines. I'm using a dry brushing technique going from heavy to light as we progress through the different shades of colour. Next colour is Macragge Blue. This will make up the majority of the blue shade on the Space Marine. This method of dry brushing coloured layers on I've aptly named Slapchop Premium, as it's not as basic as standard Slapchop, but it's definitely faster than standard painting methods. Colour number 3 is Ultramarine Blue from Vallejo. I find this to have a very rich, vibrant colour, perfect for giving the Ultramarine his iconic striking blue look. You can already see the layering coming into play, but we have one final colour to go. Finally, I'm using a light sky blue from a cheap paint set off of Amazon. For being a cheap set, this is actually really good value for money and gives you a wide range of unusual colours that are normally hard to find. The sky blue in this set provides the final shade of highlighting on the mini. These paints do dry a bit satin though, so bear that in mind. It's fine for dry brushing. Despite some rough around the edges textures and probably needing more time removing mould lines than I gave it, the mini is looking solid with the layer building on the blues really popping. It really works well on modern 40k minis. Next, I'm going to be using Abaddon Black to paint the bolter as well as the undersuit and helmet mesh. There was a critical mistake I made at this point which didn't even cross my mind. The temperature. The UK has had a very hot summer recently, so instead of going on smooth, my black paint decided to start streaking and drying as I was laying it down on the mini. Not ideal, but after some thinning, I managed to somewhat salvage it. For the gold on the suit, I'm using Retributor armor. This gold is potentially one of my favourite on the market, not just from Games Workshop, but the model making scene in general. Painting the pauldrons can be a bit tedious, but it's important not to stress too much about spills, and in my case that's quite often. But much like the black paint, this was drying very quickly on the mini, so it didn't lay on as smooth as I'd liked. The Retributor armor gold really pops, and it confuses me as to why this isn't the colour they provide you in the starter sets. Next up, silver. Now, I don't think it matters too much what shade of silver you use for this, but generally I prefer using a bright, vibrant shade for areas on the power pack such as the exhausts, skulls and bolts, as well as areas on the bolter itself to add details. Next, I'm using Macragge Blue again, just to touch up areas where I got a little overzealous with the gold to tidy them up. Next, I'm using Mechanica Standard Grey. I'll be using this to dry brush some wear onto the bolter. You can use silver for this, but personally I think it gives off a nicer finish with the grey effect. Annoyingly, that streaking black paint from earlier has come round to bite me. Now it's time for the dreaded eyes. This is probably the part most 40k fans dislike the most, and it's easy to understand why. I'm using Memphiston Red with a dab of orange at the front of the lenses for highlights, then tidied up with Macragge Blue. Next up, I'm using Leadbelcher Silver to paint in some fine details on areas of the mini, mainly the power pack jet areas. To me, it's small areas of interest like this which make a mini look more authentic when being played. Now it's time for the leather pouches. I'm using Thondia Brown as the base, being careful not to smother the model and having to go back and correct my mistakes. I like that even these old 4th edition minis have enough detail on them that you can spend time really making them come to life. Then, once the brown has dried, I'm going over it with a slightly lighter brown in order to highlight the edges on them, making them look worn. With our happy little blue fellow now looking very snazzy, it's time to start adding some washes to make him look dirty and oily. I'm using Agrak's Earth Shade on the gold, specifically because it dries a brown shade which, in my opinion, looks a lot better on gold than Nuln Oil. Admittedly, in hindsight, I think I got carried away and should have probably put it on a bit lighter, but it still looks great. Now for the Nuln Oil, everyone's favourite panel liner. One thing I very quickly learned when using Nuln Oil is less is more. Lathering up the mini in thick coats often just makes them look like they've walked out of an oil bath. I think the key to using this is trying to imagine where there would be natural shadows and using it in those areas on the mini. Things like panel lines around the feet, using it to give depth to surfaces and textures. I feel like it can be a bit of an art form, getting the shading right, but overall I'm pleased with the finish it gave the mini. But how does it look when dry? All in all, I'm very pleased with how this little guy came out. Are there things I would have done differently? Absolutely. I should have warmed up that primer can to give it that bit extra smoothness, and the heat causing the paint to streak was not ideal. But for a 4th edition mini, he looks right at home with his Primaris brothers on the battlefield. Oh, and one more thing. Try to improve on my camera angles so you can see better. It's been a learning experience. Well, I hope you enjoyed. If you've got any tips of your own about little cheats for painting minis, I'm always happy to hear them, and subscribe for more model making content like this. Until next time, take care.
For the Emperor!